And we're live. Wow, we're with the Pastor Juan Rodriguez from Florida Conference, the Youth and Young Adult Director, a diehard Miami Dolphins fan. Man, I actually remember the days way back from Dan Marino. You know what I'm saying? Those were the
Yes,
days.
those are good days. Those were better days.
Yes. But we're so thankful for him joining us and being willing to share his story and the story of growing young Adventists in Florida Conference. And we are delighted that God has given us this particular platform and technology for us to connect and share our stories. The official title, as I just told you, for Pastor Rodriguez right now, he is the Youth and Young Adult Director, Young Adult Ministries Director for Florida Conference. It's a big conference with many different regions, and he has the responsibility and also the privilege to lead in that capacity. And as we begin our conversation, I just wanted to give Pastor Juan the time to kind of give us a background, a history of how God has led him in the past, from his formative years until this moment. Why don't we do that right now?
Yeah, no problem. Hey, thank you, Justin, for having me on this interview. I appreciate you allowing me to share with you, and it's always a privilege to do something with you, Justin. I think you are a rock star, so I'm privileged to be a part of this time with you.
You the rock star, man. You the rock star.
So I was, I grew up in an Adventist home. My parents sent me to Adventist schools when I was young. I went to public school in the beginning, and I was bullied, and it wasn't a good experience for me. And so, praise God, my parents took me out of public school and put me inside of an Adventist school. And so I grew up there. I've been blessed to have wonderful parents. I don't have the story of the legalistic, upbringing. My parents were more of the hippie mentality, so they were a lot more, open in the sense of when it came to religion. But when I was going to Forest Academy in my high school years,
Forest Lake.
Yeah, Forest Academy. That's right. Class of '91. What? So anyways, when I was going there were two people there that really impacted my life in that school. The coach, Rodney Fulbright. In fact, the gymnasium is named after him, Fulbright. Okay. And so, and also English teacher, Miss Hopkins, Wanda Hopkins is her name. And so while I was there, I had great teachers. The teachers were all good, but what made them different is that they actually cared about my personal life. And there were moments that I was going through stressful times or bad times or difficult times, and so they could tell, and so they would sit me down and just ask me, hey, what's going on? What's happening? I've noticed this, or I would act out in a way that wasn't good, especially if we're playing sports. I would be more angry than usual, maybe say a few chosen words that were not very good for me to say. And so the coach would sit me down, and make me he'd punish me with doing push-ups and sit-ups first. And then after that, he would just sit me down and talk to me and ask me, hey, what's going on? What's your problem? You usually don't act this way. What's going on in your life? And so just having those kind of people to sit down and listen to me was really huge in my life, and being a high school student. And so there were pivotal moments where I could look back and say, I praise God for people like that in my life that blessed me to do that. So yeah, man, I've been blessed to be surrounded. I've been blessed by parents who believed in Adventist education to send me there. In fact, they believed it in so much. They might not. Education. Absolutely. They may not be happy about me saying this, but they believed it strongly enough that they would use credit cards for me to go to when I was in elementary school. And at one time had to file for bankruptcy because of they couldn't, it was just terrible. It was a bad time financially for us. But that's how much they believed in it. They were willing to do that. But through that process, I was blessed to have the kind of people that were kind, loving, Christ-centered, and would listen to me, when times were rough and stuff like that. So I praise God for that. Yeah.
So I want to actually use the terminology where you had some pivotal moments in your life where people deeply empathize with you as a person.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that's critical for any young person to have at least one or two people in their lives that just empathizes with them, right? We're
Absolutely.
gonna actually get to empathy a little later. But I'm so glad that you brought that out, and also that was your experience.
Right.
Because like you and I know in our work with young people, there are some young people that do not have those kind of people in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, so from Forest Lake, you had the coach and also Miss Hopkins that had a monumental influence on your life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so what impact did that take you? Like, where was the next destination? Like, how did you decide which college or university you wanted to go to, and also the call to ministry? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Well, in my senior year of college, of high school, trying to decide what I'm going to do with my life, I sensed this. God was leading me into His Word, and I sensed by reading His Word that He wanted me to get into ministry, or at the very least, go study ministry in college. I wasn't quite sure if I was going to go into the whole pastoral field, because honestly, I thought pastors were kind of losers in my time. I didn't think much about pastors. And so I didn't want to go into that field, but I knew that God was calling me at least to study ministries. So maybe, He was trying to talk into my life or share with me things that I needed to know. So through that process, what was interesting is that, again, people like those that I mentioned blessed me with their mentorship, but also there was Bill Crofton, who was my youth pastor when I was at Forest Lake Church. He baptized me when I was 12 years old. And so I was able to lean on him and share with him some of my thoughts. But what's really funny about the story is that I was dating a beautiful person named Odalis Fuentes. Now she's my wife in high school. And during my senior year, I had told her, that I sensed that God was calling me into the ministry. And she looked at me like, what are you telling me? What, because she never thought that I would be the kind of person that would go into ministry. I didn't have the minister's, lifestyle or attitude, if you want to call it that. But so she was in shock. And what's really funny about that story is that ever since she was a kid, her dad was praying for her to marry a pastor.
Wow.
And so her dad had her take piano lessons so that she can prepare to be a pastor's wife. And so, and she didn't want to do that, right? That was like totally against what she wanted to do. In fact, there was a few things she didn't want to do. She didn't want to marry a pastor. She didn't want to marry a Puerto Rican, which I am. And and she didn't want to have the last name Rodriguez, because that's like Smith in the American world. So anyway, so she got all three. But needless to say, in the journey of that, God just led me organically through His Word into going into ministry. Like I said, Pastor Bill Crofton also had a great influence in my life and my growth, and wanting to know more about what it meant to be a minister. And he kind of shared with me a lot of things that I needed to know as a young person. And so at that decision, when I was at FLA my senior year, there was no other consideration really of where to go. There was no internet to discover what other schools were doing. So it was either Southern or I don't know what else was out there. Maybe a school in Texas, right? Southwestern or something like that. But yeah, so I chose to go to Southern to go into ministry there after my senior year. And so that's where I went for my 4 years. We got married there my last year. And went off.
You and your wife went both to Southern together.
Yeah, we went to Southern. Yeah,
and she's a high school sweetheart that actually stuck with you all.
That's
through
right.
the time.
That's right.
And taught that vision to ministry, and she just walked along with you. Wow.
Yeah. Praise awesome. God. Yeah, I've been blessed. And so got married during our last year at Southern, and then we went off to the seminary at Andrews. The Florida conference picked me up, sent us off to Andrews University, and that's where we had our first son. My last semester there, we had our first son in Michigan.
Andrews, Berrien Springs, man.
Yeah, the frozen tundra. Yeah,
it's a place where a lot of reproduction happens.
Absolutely,
especially PKs. Yes, at a I think in a GC meeting, they gathered a group of PKs and said, "How many of you were born in Berrien Springs?" and about 60% of the hands went up.
Oh, that's hilarious. I didn't know
Like
that. That's
all
so funny.
over the world. Like this is all over the world, So that was pretty funny.
That is hilarious.
All right. So you went to Florida from seminary and you
Yes.
began your ministry as a youth pastor.
Yes.
And that's where I want to kind of zero in. So as you were beginning this ministry for the youth, and I'm sure you probably reflected on your life and the mentors in your life, but what was some of the, I guess, ministry philosophies, if you can call it that, for you to kind of engage in youth ministry? What were some guidelines that you had for yourself, or did you just go in to really just experience and do trial and error? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think trial and error for sure was part of my philosophy, just trying to do new things. But when I came into the church I went to, which was the Jacksonville Mandarin Church, when I went to that church, I had a good senior pastor, Pastor Lionel LaMountain. So he allowed me to experiment and to do things and to fail and to do things that were out of the box. And so that really gave me a blessing, because some senior pastors are afraid to do that kind of stuff. And he didn't have that fear to do that,
Permission to fail. That's amazing.
Yeah, and he was okay with that. And he actually told me about, which I didn't know about, this book called Purpose Driven Youth Ministry back in the day. This is a book that came out of Saddleback. And so that was a huge influence in what we did. So everything we did at that church as a youth pastor was based out of that book. Our five purposes, everything that we talked about was based out of the purpose-driven youth model. So that was basically what we kind of used. But beyond that, my base for how I see ministry, not just with youth, but in general, has always been a motto that I felt God put in my heart a long time ago. And it's nothing new. It's based on a text that Jesus said. It's, to love God with all my heart and help others do the same. And so everything that I do is in that framework. I want to love God and I want to help you do the same. And so if I create space to do that in whatever I do, then I'm fulfilling what I feel what God has called me to do. So that kind of has guided me, everything I do, regardless of the models or regardless of, purpose-driven youth ministry, which is what I used, or anything else that was happening back in the early 90s. That's been something that's always stood there.
Best decade, 90s. I resonate. Yes. So, I actually love that book. I actually read that book myself, and also do agree on the purpose-driven ministry instead of any program-driven or ministry-driven or personality-driven ministry. And after your 5 years there, you are actually picked up by the conference to lead out as a associate youth director. Correct. For the conference. Yeah. That actually shows how passionate you were and how much you love God and helped the youth to do the same. I just want to kind of go there for associate directorship in Florida Conference for Youth Ministry. What were some of the things that you did and some of the roles that you played within that framework?
Well, I was actually at that church for 2.5 years before they were asking me to serve there as an associate. So if you can imagine being in my mid-20s, serving as associate youth director for the conference. So that was a very interesting, and nothing that I expected or even wanted, just felt God's leading in it. But it all comes back around really to the person that mentored me. So the person, Pastor Bill Crofton, who baptized me when I was 12 years old, was during that time the youth director for the conference. I see. So he invited me to serve as an associate, but I already had a relationship with him. So that was a very seamless transition for me to work from a good mentor that I had as a senior pastor, then right into another good mentor as youth director. And that time there, I served there for about 7 years. Some of that time was also serving as a senior pastor of a church because the conference went through a financial troubles around the early 2000s, around there. And so I had to go to an old country church up in Taylor County, Florida, Perry, Florida. And so I was there for a while, pastoring for 3 years. Well, I still did the associate stuff. So I had a dual role during that time. But yeah, I served there 7 years under Pastor Bill Crofton. And again, I try to follow the whole purpose-driven youth model, which is what I was working with at that time with different churches, helping out either youth pastors or lay youth leaders and planning events. During that time, we were very event oriented. We were very program oriented. And so programs were things that we as planning, whether it be training events, whether it be youth events, high school retreats, college retreats, everything flowed doing these conference-wide events. And that's really what we focused on during that time.
I see. One of the things that I want to kind of go back to is you talked about your pastor, Bill Crofton, who was your mentor. And I guess ever since the time he baptized you, I'm just assuming this, just correct me if I'm wrong, but he has been a constant mentor throughout the course of your growth, also into adulthood and into ministry. And has there been that ongoing relationship that really just kind of shaped you or formed you along the way?
Oh, absolutely. Just throughout time, there might have been some times where we didn't keep in touch as much, but, I would always reach out to him, whether it be for personal stuff, like, dedicating some of my kids or ordain. I had him as our main speaker for when I was ordained. So, different things and monumental moments in my life. But even recently, when I was asked to come and serve as youth director, I was kind of hesitant. I really loved where I was at. I really loved Jackson. In fact, what happened was, Justin, is that I went to serve at that church for 3 years while I was still doing the associate youth director, where I did that for 7 years. But then I left that to go back to the church where I started as a youth pastor.
Oh, it was the church that you were at as a youth pastor.
Exactly.
Wow.
So I went back there to serve as a youth pastor for a couple of years, and they asked me to serve as a senior pastor.
Okay.
So I went to that same exact church where I was when I started years ago. So my ministry life has been a very unique, weird ministry life where I've gone back and forth from Jacksonville youth ministries back to Jacksonville, then youth ministries again. But before I came back to this role that I'm in right now, I contacted Pastor Bill Crofton, and I said, should I do this? I don't really want to do this, but maybe God wants me to do it. Should I do it? And so we had a conversation, that really helped me kind of see how God was leading me to do that. I mean, I had other mentors in my life that I was talking to, but he was definitely one person that I reached out to give me some guidance, as I looked into questioning whether I should do this or not.
Awesome. Wow. So going back to where you were the youth pastor as the senior pastor, and from what I've heard, you were there for about 12 years. Were you there for 12 years? Yeah.
So that would be the senior pastor. Let's see. I forget the numbers, but I think total in that one church would have been 12 years, and exactly senior pastor probably about 7 or 8 years. Yeah.
I see. So it was a transition that took place within that church context for you to be the senior pastor after you've served as a youth pastor. So what was the different dynamic, and what was were some struggles, and how were you able to integrate the younger generation with the older generation, given your context?
Well, I think that was a challenge, because when I came back, now some of the people that were part of my youth group back in the day were now adults, young adults, or maybe 30-year-old adults at the time. So it was interesting, because with those there was a smoother transition where we're kind of like taking this journey together. We'll continue to take that journey together. But I think with some adults, I wouldn't say all of them, but some adults, it was harder for them because, I was the youth pastor, but now I'm the senior pastor. And I think they felt like they still had to put me in place or keep me in their box, or, kind of like make sure I don't go crazy or anything like that.
I see.
So it was an interesting dynamic there, but, we got through it because, those people, and I love that congregation. I love those people. I still do. And so it was it was a challenging dynamic, but it was a good dynamic as we, made relationships more important than anything else.
Right. You were all on a journey together. You grew up together.
Yeah.
And and through many challenges, that didn't deter you from actually doing the mission together and journeying to Christ. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So now coming back to your current post, you were there for about 7 years.
Yeah. Associate. Yeah.
Okay. No. I mean, as a youth director for the Florida Conference.
Oh, for the conference. I've been there. I'll be going into my 3rd year now only.
Okay, 3rd year.
Yeah.
And as you were just beginning your tenure, I think it was about that time. I think that was when you were exposed to and got acquainted with the Growing Young book and the Growing Young journey. Can you actually talk about how you encountered the Growing Young commitments in your ministry context?
So when I first heard about it was actually they gave out this book at one of our ministerial retreats, and the ministerial department was giving out the book. I'm not quite sure, except maybe for one of them, they actually knew what they were giving out because they were passing out gold to the pastors, and that they didn't quite realize what was being passed out. That could be a game changer for all these churches. And so I took the book, I read it, I was like, wow, this is awesome. I had heard also a podcast by Carrie Newhoff, and he had mentioned that book and was talking to one of the authors in that podcast. So I had heard about the principles through there first, and I got the book. And then when I started getting into it, I started researching, right? In my new role, I started researching, okay, what's happening in the NAD, what's going on? And I discovered that like a few months before I came into this role, I saw that the NAD had voted to like take Growing Young serious and make it into Growing Young Adventists, and it was like a big deal in the NAD. And so I was like, wow, this is serious. And so that's when I started getting deeper into it at that time. And then I would receive, like 1,000 texts or digital messages from Alan Martin about it. So, I guess it was important stuff. If Alan is sending me 1,000 texts, I need to get more into it. So, So yeah, that's how I started getting more into it and deeper into it and learning more in the journey.
Okay, so your first impression was this is something that is desperately needed for the local church, and it's something that was, I guess, good for such a time as this, as we are, the reality as a church, we're aging and shrinking. So after you read it, after you had that impression, after you felt that the importance of it, what were some of your first initial steps in implementing that in your ministry context in the Florida Conference?
Well, I definitely took in all the concepts and the language that was used in the book, which was very important for me. I took it very serious, and so started talking to the president about it. At that time, it was President Mike Colley, and they were interested in doing some convocations they called it Legacy of Hope. And what we did is we had these convocations to be able to share with the church or the churches. We went to about 9 different cities throughout the state of Florida to share the situation that we're in, which was young people are leaving and we got to do something to start engaging with them. The focus of the Legacy of Hope convocations were more of a mentoring type aspect. We shared stories about the importance of mentoring. And then what I did is I bought thousands of books of Growing Young, and I took them to these convocations where there was a few speakers. I spoke, President spoke, other people spoke. And so we just shared with everybody these books of Growing Young so that they could start the conversations in their own churches. This is specifically for leaders. So that started to get the ball rolling. It started getting the understanding that this is something that's huge, important. The president was there at all these cities to share with them the message of how we need to start mentoring the next generation. And so from there, we just made the invitation after that to church leaders and churches that were interested in starting this journey with us.
So let me actually track back to the time where you talked about the president being fully in. There was a buy-in from the conference administration that this is something that we needed to do. What were some of the conversations that took place between you and the conference president and some of the executive leadership at Florida Conference?
Well, before I came in, the good thing for me is that the president was already sold out into wanting to reach the next generation, and he was willing to take, some pretty drastic steps. And so that made everything easier for me. I didn't have to convince him,
All right.
he kind of knew
already
this. Exactly. So, and then the president's assistant at the time was Alan Machado, who is our current president right now, because we had a transition period where the president retired and we got a new president, but it's been seamless because the new president was also on board with, we need to reach the next generation. In fact, he did a whole dissertation on how to reach the next generation. So he was already wanting to see these kinds of things happening. And then Growing Young was just an easy fit to our context. It was an easy fit to help churches. They had already passed out the book to the pastors. So it was nothing that I had to sell to them. They were already sold. And so it was just now, how are we going to do this to help churches? Right. So it was already set up by the thought that young people are leaving the church and we're going to die. And so what are we going to do? What can we bring to the table? So Growing Young was what I brought to the table. I said, this is what we need to do. And so they were all in it. They were ready to go,
So all the pastors, when they were given the book and there was a convocation, was the general response from the pastors, okay, let's do this? They're all fired up and they were willing to go through the journey together?
Absolutely not. That would have been awesome. No, I would even say I would reach out. So they got the book, they heard about it, and there was absolutely no pastor that got back with me on their own. So what I had to do is I had to just reach out to them. We had these district meetings where I would talk about it, and maybe I had like one pastor from there that would want to talk to me about it. And then what I would start doing is I would start, whether it be through email or whatever means, I would share stuff about it here and there, at those meetings. And there would be some interest, but ultimately it was me setting up one-on-one meetings with the pastor, because I don't think anything can really change a church unless the pastor is solely on board with it. And so when there was some kind of interest, my thing was, okay, let's go out to eat. And so I would take the pastor out to eat. We would sit down. I would talk to him about it, and he would hear it and listen. And I would say about 80% of the time, the pastor at that meal was on board. And so then we took the next necessary steps, which was me coming to their church and going through the process of how that journey is going to take place in their local church.
So in your conversation with the pastor, as it was a personal encounter, a personal conversation, like what were some of the, I guess, if there were any initial pushback or I guess resistance or the pointing out of how will it even work in my church kind of thing? Can you just talk about some of the things that the pastors pointed out or kind of, as you bounce back and forth with him or her, what were some of the things that they were saying?
So some of them would say, we don't have enough young people. Like, I have 2 young people. This is really going to work in my church. So that was kind of like their thing. And will this focus, take away money from older people giving money? That was some of the concern as well. So it depended on the context of what church it was. Some would even have concerns, it's not an Adventist book, that was a concern for a few, and so there was different concerns about it, but I think the main concern has always been, I don't have enough young people in my church, and I would try to, then tell them that this is not a youth ministry program. This is the whole church flowing together, and so it would just take that kind of conversation and sharing, the importance of it, even if they had 1 or 2 young people. But that would be the main pushback I would get. We don't have enough young people. We really don't want to do this. And will this turn away the crowd that usually gives more money to the church, would be a part of it and stuff like that. And I remember in my church having that kind of pushback when I would share. When I was in the church where I was pastoring, I would share the information from Barna, David Kinnaman, in his book that he put out. I shared the church, and I would have elders in my elders board say, you keep on talking about youth, but what about us older people? And so there was that constant tension that goes on, which is okay. I think those are conversations that you have to reassure people. And I think those are the kind of conversations I would have with pastors that were concerned about their elders, and I would tell them my story. Yeah, I know what you're saying. I've been there. So yeah, it's having that one-on-one conversation with the pastors that would go around those type of topics.
This is good because I think we want to just kind of tap into just a little bit of the questions that they're bringing to the table. First of which is we don't have that many young people, and how would it work in our church context? And as you just pointed out, it's not something for the young people. It's for the church to experience a culture transformation. That's the wording that we use, so that the church becomes a place that is welcoming to all generations, including both the older and younger generation. Can you expound on how you've seen that at work for any church that went through the journey? Was that a reality for those churches?
Yeah, there's a beautiful church in Homosassa, and that was a more interesting situation because that church, I think it had one pastor, but he pastored that church and another church at the time. Mm-hmm. And but he was on his way out, and so they were like in a weird transition. Anyways, this gentleman calls me at the conference office, and he goes, Juan? And I was like, yeah, Juan, this is Bob, and we got a situation in our church, and we need your help. And I was like, all right, Bob, tell me about it. And he pretty much said that his average age for his church was 80 years of age. Okay. That they had been praying for a long time for young people because they had no young people. Their attendance was probably about 50 people, average age 80. And they were trying to find out how they can grow young. He had been to one of our convocations. He had gotten one of the books of Growing Young. He actually read the book, and he wanted to find out. He read the whole book. Yeah, he read. Well, I can't say he read it cover to cover, but I know at least he read the portion of Keychain Leadership because that's the one he kept on quoting to me. Okay. All right. So he talked about wanting to make a change, and they said they had been praying for years for young people, and I think that probably right there for any church that has no young people or very few young people is to start praying. Ask God to do a miracle because they did. They prayed. They baptized a grandmother that apparently had plenty of young people in her family. And then those young people started inviting their friends to come to church. And then I would get a different call from Bob. And then Bob would tell me, Juan, we need some help. Because Bob would have these like all-night parties at his house. Let's see, he was 83 years old. 83. 83-year-old Bob with his 81-year-old wife would have an all-night party at his house where they would stay up all night long with the young people playing games or whatever. And and it just amazes me that someone his age would do that. But they would do it, and they started reaching out to young people, their friends. The young people started reaching out to their friends for events, whether it be the all-night party or some game place that they went to. And then our conversation started changing into, all right, you have this nucleus of young people that's coming to your church. Now what are we going to do about it? And we started talking about the transition of putting them into leadership, not just having them get involved with like a special music or scripture reading or something that from up front, but actually making deciding programs for their church and decisions for where the future of their church will go. And so that was something that was a little bit hard for them, but they understood because they were in a more desperate situation. Their church was literally dying. Right. And so they knew they needed to make changes. And so that's when they put it on turbo speed. They put these young ladies into the board. They put them into being leaders of their outreach programs that was already going on. And they even had a 12-year-old female become one of their elders. Wow. So they are the most progressive church in America with a 12-year-old female. But So yeah, that's just an amazing story that it's just still the journey is being taken right now. Now it's different. Not all of them because of this pandemic haven't been able to come together, and coming together was a huge deal for them. Right. And this virtual stuff right now kind of hurts, but yeah, so they're trying their best still to move forward. But that's just a wonderful story of how they were committed to that. And you have to be committed. I think that's probably the best story. And Bob is the main leader of that church, right? You got to have if you have the most influential leader in the church, whether that be the pastor or someone else on board, you're going to get a lot more traction.
Right.
And so he's definitely the most influential leader for that church. And when he made the commitment to want to put these young people into leadership positions, he was willing to die on that hill. So we have that story of the young lady as a 12-year-old elder, but she was also the one that wanted to do the sound system and the video system, the AV for the church. Right. And so
the audio person.
Exactly. So then there was a person that was doing it already, and he trained her to pretty much do what he was doing. This is an older gentleman in his 70s. He trained her, and and he trained her very well, in fact, and then they asked her to take over. Well, he was so upset that he left the church. So then what do you do? Do you try to help the person that left, or do you try to stick to your guns and allow that 12-year-old to take the lead? And Bob and his leadership team, the board, they chose to go with the 12-year-old. And unfortunately, I don't know if he's come back, but as far as I know, he had left and never come back. And so that was kind of like, I guess, the sad part of it, if you want to say it, because maybe he didn't capture the vision of where the church was going, because they were going on turbo speed with this. And sometimes that causes casualties if you go too fast. Right. But nevertheless, they were committed to the process. Okay. And sometimes that kind of stuff happens, but that's part of the story.
Yeah, that entire story can be gleaned here at Vimeo to give you a little teaser of the elder.
We have an older membership. I think probably 75 years would be an average. And for a period of 6 or 8 years, we prayed for more young people, more children, more youth. And we would have some come for a little while and then leave. And the last 3 years, we've been truly blessed, in part by Diane Fisher.
I found this church through the food pantry. We were in need, and I came to this food pantry, and then I decided, well, I'm going to give this church a try, and I did. And they're just welcomed me with open arms, and then I started bringing my grandkids here.
And that's just a teaser there for you guys to check out. The link, again, I'm going to pull it up, is on Vimeo, and that's the number that you will need to remember to capture that story. Take the next, after this, or even right now, if you want to, take the next 4 to 5 minutes to watch this video. It brought tears to my eyes, because this couple, or the leadership of this church that executed and implemented the Growing Young principles, wow, it just really turned the church around. And there's a lot of struggles along the way, and I'm sure there will be. But again, the Growing Young Adventist is a journey that you take. And it's a journey that intergenerations take. And I'm glad that you mentioned about that young person that taught the 12-year-old girl how to do what he did. And when he found himself out of a job, maybe that's one of the reasons why he chose to leave. But in the overall journey context, the most ideal picture would be that he would train other people as well, right? He would walk alongside that person, and also with other people that he can also train to keep the momentum going. And for the older generation that might be listening or might watch the replay of this, their greatest fear is, okay, if we focus on young people, what about us, and what happens to us, and what's our role? Can you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah, and I always tell them this, because this does come up when I visit churches, and I share with them in the afternoon the principles with the whole church. We have what we call this Growing Young conversation on Sabbath afternoons, where we invite the whole church to come out. Old, young, doesn't matter. The whole church to come out so we can have the conversation and have the tough conversation, answer any questions that they might have. because this is a whole church approach. I might meet with the leaders in the beginning, but eventually we have to meet with the whole church to kind of like share with them the journey of where we're going. And those questions do come up because what happened with that person is sad, and that story is not in the video, by the way. That's behind the stories type thing. But I think that when you have someone that is concerned about, so what am I supposed to do now? I've been doing this maybe for 15, 20 years, whether it be a greeter, elder, or whatever ministry it is. And that's when I tell them that the most important thing you can do is train that next generation to do it better than you, to be excellent. Like that would be like the most important job that you have. And I oftentimes just compare it to what Jesus did. Jesus did ministry for 3.5 years, but he trained his disciples to do his work because he knew that he was leaving. And eventually, unfortunately, there will be a time if Christ doesn't come back soon that all of us, that I'll be gone in 50 years or whatever. And so I have to be able to leave that legacy and pass that baton to the next generation. I think that is one thing that God is calling all of us to do. And so then who becomes the most important person? The most important person becomes that person that mentors others. The disciple maker becomes the most important person. And so I try to help them see a different ministry that God is calling them to do. And they can walk alongside them because they won't have perfected everything once you teach them. They will still continue to learn and grow. And that is something that is very important. But what I've realized is that becomes very difficult because it's hard to mentor someone and help them in that journey because it takes time.
Yes.
It's the most important thing that we can do, but it takes time. And sometimes we either are too distracted to take the time or we think we don't have the time or we don't see it as a priority. And so it hurts the process of mentoring. But I do believe if Jesus took the time, that we need to be the same way. We need to take the time to mentor the next generation, whether it's me or someone that's older than me that's mentoring me or so on. We have to be able to understand that discipleship factor, that mentoring factor, that key chain leadership factor is huge for the future of our church.
Yes. And I want us to actually distinguish key chain leadership with key dumping leadership or key throwing leadership. I think often when nominating committee season rolls around, you're just looking for people to do jobs. Is that what key chaining is? Like throwing responsibilities at people, or is this something else? Can you explain that?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely is not key dumping. We don't want to just say, and that's what we see sometimes, not just young people, but anyone crash and burn. We just tell a person, hey, we want you to be the Sabbath school leader, Sabbath school superintendent, or whatever word you want to use in your church. You're the leader now. And here are the lessons, and go and make a cool team or make a great team for Sabbath school teachers now. And they don't have a clue what to do. And they're just making it as it goes. And it's like baptism by fire, but sometimes for some people, or a lot of people, that doesn't work. And so key chain leadership is going by their side and leading them through the process. Having that relationship is important, and just helping them understand the whys of what is done, and not just what is done, but the whys of what is done, and be able to understand that it's important not just to have a ministry of excellence, but it's also important to have your own personal relationship with Jesus as well, because and that's where the real mentoring takes place. You're not just concerned about making sure that, we'll use the Sabbath school again, that Sabbath school is running well, but your concern is, how are you doing in your life, and how is your journey with Jesus? That's when it gets deep, right? But that's where the time factor comes in, right? That's when we make that a priority to make sure that the person you're going alongside with and helping them in that journey understands that it's more than just ministry here. It's doing life together and understanding God's mission or God's potential for their lives together.
Yes, doing life together. I love that. I think it takes intentionality for all of us, especially for those of us who are leaders. if we're not intentional, as Juan just said, time just flies by.
Yeah.
You know, even through this pandemic, we're wondering what day is it today. I don't know if you're asking yourself that, but I don't even know. Oh, today's Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday. You know, it just goes, you know.
Yeah.
And I think unless we're really intentional about setting aside time for the next generation, it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the most uncomfortable things that we can do that really helps our growth. And I think one of the greatest things that I experienced as a person is in training and teaching other people. It forces you to grow. You know, it forces you to grow as a person. And I think the missing factor in many of our Sabbath experiences is many people just sit through a service and go home. You know, and the engagement empowerment process is something that we really need to embed into the culture. And oftentimes that doesn't take place. And I think what Growing Young Adventist Journey offers is precisely that. It gives you a platform, an excuse to actually do what you do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And even in my own personal life, you know, I had to say to myself, all right, I know that I got a lot of things going on, but I'm asking people to mentor the next generation. So what am I doing, like, to do that? And so I prayed about it, and that's so important. This is the key of prayer and asking God to, you know, invade your space and lead you in the process. But so I pray to God and ask God, you know, who is it out there that I can mentor? You know I have my sons, you know, and I want to be intentional with mentoring them. But is there someone out there outside of that circle that I can mentor? And he convicted me of this one young person that's a musician, and I know nothing about music, like nothing about music. And so, but God said, you know, hey, you know, invest your time into him. And so I called him up and I said, hey, listen, you know, I just want to let you know that I've been praying and God has put you in my mind to just mentor you. You know, I'm not going to tell you how to play the better guitar or how to sing better, but I'm willing to mentor you in helping you become a strong person in Christ Jesus and become a great leader for Jesus if you would allow me to do so. And so, and like he answered and he was almost crying. He said, you know, I have been waiting for years for someone to take the time to mentor me in my journey with God. And so that blew me away, you know, that God would do something special like that. But it also taught me that there's a lot of young people out there, whether they're in their early 20s or, you know, late teens or whatever, that are interested in being mentored. And that's what I try to share with the church, because when I talk to these churches, they're concerned that, well, the young people really don't care, or they really don't know me, or they really don't really care if I mentor them. But the opposite is true. They actually want to be mentored. And I've often asked that question. You know, there's young people in this conversation on Sabbath afternoons. And I asked them, I said, would you be interested in having one of these people over here mentor you in your journey with God? And 100% of the time, they say yes. So it's like this it's like re-educating the mind and helping them understand that the young people, the next generation, are hungry for people to guide them with wisdom. They might have a lot of knowledge, but they don't have the wisdom to navigate through that knowledge. And so that's where a healthy Christian adult can really be a blessing to the next generation.
And that's so good. That's so good. We need to always remember, and I think the prayer factor is so crucial, because God will definitely lead you to a person that you can mentor. And the harvest is ripe when it concerns mentorship, because especially nowadays, even through this pandemic and the recent graduation season that has been kind of like, you know, it's not normal right now. And they're facing an uncertain future, and they don't really know how life is going to continue. And especially during this time, I think this is a prime time for the older generation that have gone through many crises in their lives. Really step in and let them know that, hey, I'm here to listen and to offer any type of counsel if you want me to. And it's different than a lecture or, hey, or pointing out just mistakes or pointing fingers. It's, hey, I want to really care for you. It's a genuine concern. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to actually go to, other than Homasa's church, Are there any churches that you would like to highlight or tell us about that have done a best practice, whether it's listening or going on that journey? I remember before we actually logged on, you talked about a listening journey that a church went through. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we have a handful of churches that are in the process and moving well, but every church that I'm involved with right now are in the beginning stages. No one has reached anywhere near where we want them to be, as far as the journey goes. And so that before the pandemic started, I was putting my energies into a church up in north area of Florida. And so one of the things that the leaders wanted to do, as we talked about what has to happen in the Growing Young journey, is have a listening party or a listening session. And so we talked about
listening party.
Yeah, listening party. And that's what they ended up calling it, because we were trying to, think of different names that things would, attract young people. And so they planned this party with games and stuff like that, but they would let the young people know that they wanted to be intentional with listening to them. And one of the question and answer type things that they used were some of the cards that Caleb has with Humans of Adventism. So they used some of those question cards to just start out and break the ice with and stuff like that. But then they started, engaging with them to get answers from them. But what was really neat is that, they expected, this is not a very big church, attendance wise, on a Sabbath morning, maybe like 60 or 70 people on a good Sabbath. And so they expected maybe 10 young people, maybe 12 young people. But they made the invitation to young people that, weren't even really coming to church regularly. And when they made the invitation to let them know that they can listen to them, they want to know their thoughts about church and how they can move forward with their church family, they had 50 young people show up.
Wow.
And the pastor was like, I did not expect this at all. And so it kind of was an eye opener to them that, really showed them that when you take the time to even advertise, because all they did was really advertise and talk to people and told them to invite their friends and got on social media or whatever, and just told them, hey, we just want to listen to you. We want to play games. We want to feed you, and we want to listen to you. And they came out there, and they were fed and they were listened to. So that was a pretty neat thing that happened with them. And so, hopefully now, it's hard now with the pandemic because a lot of the stuff that was planned was, to be in person. So, but after this is done, hopefully, they can go back to their journey that they're taking together. But yeah, that was a neat thing that happened with their church when they planned that moment of listening to them.
Yeah, I mean, everything begins with listening, and I love the whole terminology of listening party. I mean, and then 50 young people showed up to be listened to.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
That speaks volumes about what the young people are craving.
Exactly.
They want people to listen to them.
And it's really, it's huge because, that wouldn't be huge if I was saying like one of our bigger churches, in Central Florida that have already, 100, 150 kids coming to the church on a Sabbath morning. But you're talking about a church that has 70 people total, like kids and adults coming on a Sabbath morning. And you're talking about maybe 8 or 10 young people that come to church. And this church had like 50 young people come out. That blows my mind. I wouldn't have expected that either. And so, but you're absolutely right. It shows you the power of those young people, especially maybe even in that, maybe that wouldn't work in another place, but at least in that environment or in that city, in that culture, they were definitely desperate for people to listen to them. Yes.
As we wrap up our time together, would you have any counsel for any local church pastors or leaders that are on the brink of making a decision to really go on this journey? What would be some sound counsel that you would offer them as they're praying about it, thinking about it, talking to each other about it? What would be your counsel for them?
Well, I would say that probably the most important thing you could do right now is to, if you haven't read the book, read the book Growing Young. That would be a huge step. and then give that to your leadership team, whether it be your church board of elders, or whatever leaders have influence in your church. I would definitely use them or have them read that book. So yeah, that would be the first step, and then try to decide, is this something that we need to do, or some version of this? The plans that we have in the Florida Conference, we customize. It's harder work and it's slower work, but we try to customize a plan for every church, because every church is different. So part of what we do through the process is we have them take the assessment that Fuller Youth Institute does. So they pay the $300. The Youth Ministries Department reimburses them 50% of that assessment. So they end up paying just half of what it costs them. And then after they have their 1 hour coaching with Fuller Youth Institute, then we sit down and we talk about, okay, what's the next step that your church wants to take, and what area do you want to focus on? And we create a plan with them. And so just I would say, take the time to pray, take the time to read the book, and then take the assessment. Look into it. Get educated. Go to the Growing Young Adventist website and get more education on what it looks like, and hear the stories of change. Because I can tell you this, at least in my knowledge, I have yet to see an Adventist or non-Adventist church that do not take these principles seriously. I have yet to see a church that hasn't had success. In fact, 100% of the time of the churches that take these principles seriously, take these commitments seriously, and put it into their church, they always succeed 100% of the time. And so that's huge. You can't say that about a lot of things, but you can say it with this. And so unless I don't know about it, but according to my life, that's what I've seen.
Actually, we got to take that to heart. 100% success rate for every church that undergoes this journey to grow young together. There's nothing more beautiful about that. Wow.
And what does that success look like? It looks like this. You have more young people come to your church, and you have more money coming into your, tithes and offerings. So that's sort of like the success rate that I'm talking about, is that you're blessed more financially, and you're blessed with more young people. And I think the other scenario, of course, this is all part of the journey, if you want to measure success, because I said that word, but I think obviously when you have young people in leadership roles, that's obviously your other, success rate. But I think that's more part of the journey, I guess.
Yes. If they're young people that are serving alongside you and co-leading with you, that's definitely
Exactly.
Oh man, this was so rich, and I just wanted to get you guys going with the Growing Young assessment. If you wanted to check that out, it's churchesgrowingyoung.com. You can get plugged in with, I guess, a individual assessment that's just for you as a leader, then a team assessment and church-wide assessment. The $300 that Juan talked about is the church-wide assessment, and I love that you guys do the 50% subsidy, which is definitely a good thing for any church that takes it seriously. And for me, I've personally taken this journey with the church that I was at. The church-wide Growing Young assessment just blew all of us away. Because it just really opened our eyes to where we were and our reality as a church. And as the older people really saw what the younger people were saying, man, that just really shook them up. Because they were doing all right,
Yeah. And I think it does. That's exactly what it does so far. What it's done to all of our churches is give them a wake up call. And be like, whoa, this thing is serious,
Definitely. I mean, we need to do a reality check with our churches, where we are as a church. And I think that begins there, and also the listening portion. All right. Thank you so much for taking your time to be with us. In closing, where can people find you online? So there's a social media. I know you're an avid blogger as well. Can you just talk about that?
I see. Can they see what's on the screen there, for Twitter and Instagram and stuff like that? All right. So you got it there at Juan Rodriguez 101489, or at Chris Ojnik on Twitter as well. And then also I do have a blog. Thank you for saying that. It's what-aboutlove.com. Whataboutlove.com. That's what-aboutlove.com. Check it out. Check out my blog. That'd be super cool.
Awesome. And a little shout out to Steve who said, great content tonight. Thank you for sowing into the future of the body of Christ. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you,
Steve.
Pastor Juan Rodriguez.
Thank you, Justin.
And we pray for all of you who are watching or who might be watching later down the line that you will take that dive and the bold commitment to grow young together as a church.
Amen. Amen.
Next time.
All right, brother. God bless.
God bless.